The explosion came without warning. Caleb Ward felt the ground shake beneath his boots before he even heard it, a muffled, distant boom, as if the mountain itself had taken a deep breath. The night sky over Stillwater split open in electric blue, a silent flash that turned the snow into glowing glass for 3 endless seconds. Ghost growled, not his usual alert. It was deeper, primal, a sound that rumbled up from the German shepherd's chest like some ancient warning. Before Caleb could react, the dog bolted into the woods, ignoring his hoarse shout, "Ghost! Get back here!" Nothing, just his own voice echoing off the frozen pines. Caleb followed the fresh tracks through the snow, climbing the old mining trail to the top of the ridge. That's where he found Ghost, motionless, tense, fixated on something that shouldn't exist. A perfect circle of melted snow, nearly 10 feet across. Steam rose slowly, twisting into ghostly spirals under the moonlight. No sound, no wind, just that faint, pulsing heat bleeding up from the frozen ground. Caleb knelt, touched the damp edge with his fingertips. Still warm. The air vibrated, not in his ears, but in his chest, a low frequency too deep to hear, but strong enough to feel in his bones. Ghost backed up a few steps, ears pinned flat. Caleb looked up at the sky, then over his shoulder at the mountain. A cold thought cut through him like a blade. Whatever fell here, did it come from above or from below? Morning came heavy, the sky a dull gray, caught between snow-covered peaks. Caleb drove down the trail back toward town with Ghost curled up on the truck's back seat. The dog hadn't eaten since the night before, and that was never a good sign. Stillwater was waking slowly. Smoke drifted from chimneys like silent prayers. The narrow streets smelled of burnt wood and stale coffee. Caleb parked in front of Heinz's Market and climbed out, feeling the weight of the stairs from behind the fogged-up window. Inside, 3 townsfolk were talking quietly by the counter. They stopped when he walked in. "Caleb," Mrs. Heinz greeted, drying her hands on her apron. "Did you see that thing last night?" "I saw it. My radio fried right when it happened," muttered Tom Kelly, the retired mechanic. "Weird business. No lightning, no thunder, just that light, and the silence after." Caleb grabbed a bag of dog food and a bottle of water. "Anyone else see anything?" The 3 exchanged uneasy looks. "The Army's drone went missing," Tom said in a low voice. "The one that patrols the edge of federal land dropped off radar last night. Nobody knows where it went down." The doorbell chimed. Sheriff Harold Briggs stepped in, brushing snow from his hat. His eyes found Caleb's and stayed there, steady, watchful. "Ward, need a word?" They stepped outside. The cold sliced at their faces like ground glass. Briggs lit a cigarette, his hand trembling slightly. Not from the cold. "You went up to the old ridge last night?" "I did." "Find anything?" Caleb hesitated. The image of that melted circle still pulsed in his mind, vivid as an open wound. "Just snow. Nothing else." Briggs drew on his cigarette, exhaling through his teeth. "These mountains keep secrets, Caleb, the kind that don't like being dug up. If I were you, I'd stay clear of whatever that was." "Whatever what was?" The sheriff didn't answer. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot, and went back inside. Ghost led him again to the frozen creek near the trail. The dog stopped, sniffing at something beneath the thin crust of ice. Caleb broke through with his boot, and there it was. Scorched metal fragments, still smoldering, glowing faintly blue in the filtered light. He picked one up. Too light, too hot. And when he closed his hand around it, he felt a vibration. Barely there, like a slow, digital heartbeat. A raspy voice came from behind him. "I know that glow." Caleb turned. Earl Danner, the old miner, stood leaning against a tree, his face etched by decades of dust and silence. He looked at the fragment with something close to fear. In '73, the government sealed off one of the old mines, said it was an atmospheric test. But I was there that night, son, I saw what they pulled out of the ground. What was it? Earl spat into the snow. Something that didn't belong there. He pulled a creased photo from his coat pocket, black and white, faded. It showed the entrance to a mine sealed with fresh concrete. That picture was taken last week, Earl said, voice trembling, and look who showed up on the edge. Caleb leaned in the lower right corner, nearly swallowed by shadow, a human figure, blurred, but there. Earl swore no one survived that mine, Caleb muttered, handing the photo back, until he showed me this. The old man turned away and disappeared among the pines, leaving only footprints in the snow and the echo of a truth buried 50 years deep. Ghost growled low. The fragment in Caleb's hand pulsed once, then went still. The mine entrance lay about 2 miles from town, hidden among ancient firs and moss-covered stone. Caleb knew the trail. He'd roamed these woods as a kid, before the war turned everything into a distant memory. Earl's photo burned in his coat pocket. Ghost led the way, focused, paws sinking into the fresh snow. The forest's silence was thick, almost tangible, broken only by the creak of frozen branches and the slow rhythm of their breath. When they reached it, Caleb stopped. The concrete was new, light gray, smooth, untouched by rust or weather. Someone had sealed the mine recently, 6 months ago, maybe less. The edges still showed the marks of fresh work, tool scratches, a faint chemical smell clinging to the cold air. Ghost sniffed along the base of the wall, then drew back with a low growl. Not fear, recognition. Blood. Caleb knelt, brushing his fingers over a dark stain barely visible against the packed snow. Still damp, fresh. It smelled of iron and something heavier, burned flesh. He looked around. 50 yards away, half hidden by the trees, stood a cabin. Old, leaning to one side, boards warped and windows cracked. But the door was ajar. Someone had been there. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and cold ashes. Caleb eased the door open and let Ghost go first. The dog swept the room in seconds, empty, but thick with the presence of whoever had just left. Dust-covered maps were spread across a makeshift table. Red lines traced underground tunnels, with coded markings Caleb didn't recognize. Numbers, coordinates, and a name, written over and over in faded blue ink, Project Stillpoint. Caleb picked up one of the sheets and held it against the weak light filtering through the broken window. On the back, scrawled in tight cursive, Test 14, total failure. Containment compromised. Silence orders confirmed. No one comes up. The date, October 12th, 1973. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket beside Earl's photo. His eyes swept the rest of the cabin, empty crates, old tools, a torn military pack. Then he saw it. Branded into the central support beam, burned deep into the dark wood, was a symbol. 3 concentric lines spiraling downward, simple, unnerving. Caleb reached out and touched it, a hum, faint but unmistakable, rising from below, from the ground. Ghost stood beside him, ears pricked, staring at the same spot, a loose floorboard near the back wall. Caleb stepped over and tapped it with his boot. The sound came back hollow. Something was underneath. He grabbed the edge of the board and pulled. The rotted wood gave way easily, dust rose, and with it a breath of warm air, impossible in that cold. Beneath the floor was a square opening descending into darkness. Rusted metal steps disappeared into the shadows, and the humming grew louder as he peered down. Ghost growled, "Don't go down there." But Caleb already knew, if he opened that door, there'd be no going back. He looked at the dog, at the hole, then at the symbol scorched into the beam. The same spiral he'd seen on the maps, the same shape the melted snow had formed from above. The hum pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat or a warning. Caleb drew a long breath. The air smelled of wet earth and oxidized metal. "If I open this," he muttered, "there's no turning back." Ghost barked once, short, sharp. His way of saying, "Then don't open it alone." Caleb smiled for the first time in days, faint but real. He unhooked the flashlight from his belt and stepped onto the first rung. The staircase spiraled downward, each metal step groaning under Caleb's weight as if waking from a long, heavy sleep. The flashlight sliced through the dark in narrow beams, catching walls of damp concrete streaked with rust and black mold. Ghost stayed pressed close to his legs, tense, focused, not afraid, ready. The dog's instincts picked up what human senses refused to notice. The air grew warmer with every step. Impossible. They were deep beneath frozen ground, yet the heat rose from below, as if something alive was breathing in the dark. After 32 steps, Caleb counted them, the passage opened up. A chamber. Circular. The walls were metal, lined with old insulation panels, some torn open to expose wires that led nowhere. In the center stood a stack of crates, arranged with military precision, each stamped with the unmistakable insignia of the United States Air Force and a faded red date, 1973. Caleb moved closer. Ghost sniffed the crates, pulled back, then sniffed again. Whatever was inside was still active. The first latch snapped open with a dry click. Inside, wrapped in yellowed plastic, were flight logs. Caleb picked one up and flipped through it under the flashlight's beam. The handwriting began neat and technical, but with every page it shifted, from professional to urgent, from urgent to desperate. Day 14, atmospheric test completed. Signal detected at 340 meters below. Origin unknown. Command requests immediate containment. He turned another page. Day 19, the anomaly is feeding. Energy draw has doubled in 48 hours. Communication with base interrupted 3 times. Equipment melts when approaching the core. More pages. The handwriting deteriorated, letters trembling, ink smeared. Day 23, orders received. Destroy everything. Seal the mine. Erase all records. No one can know what we made here. The final entry was nearly illegible. Caleb angled the light closer. We can't shut it down. It's alive. He closed the log slowly, the weight of that line settling in his chest like lead. Ghost barked once, sharp, warning. Caleb turned. In the far corner of the chamber, half covered by a green military tarp, stood a cylindrical pod, metal, untouched. And at its center, through a reinforced glass window, a blue light pulsed, faint, steady, like an electronic heart beating in the dark. Caleb stepped closer. The heat thickened with each pace, not just warmth, but pressure, a force pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. He stopped a foot from the capsule. Through the glass, he could see what was inside, a device the size of a baseball, suspended by thin, luminous filaments like spider silk made of light. Its surface was smooth, seamless, and alive with a slow, organic pulse. Not human technology. Or if it was, it had evolved beyond them. Ghost was growling now, low and constant, the fur along his neck bristling. Don't touch it. But Caleb's hand was already reaching out. Then, outside, the crunch of tires in snow. Caleb froze. Ghost stopped growling, ears swiveling toward the stairs. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, engines cutting, doors slamming. Muffled voices drifted down through the opening above. Someone's been here. Fresh tracks. Search everywhere. If he found the entrance, he's seen too much. Caleb switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed everything except the blue pulse inside the capsule, now beating faster. Ghost stood beside him, silent, waiting for his command. Caleb drew a slow, careful breath, forcing his heart to steady. He looked toward the staircase, toward the capsule, toward the dog. No way out. Flashlights flared on the steps above, slicing through the dark. They were coming. Caleb didn't think. He moved. He grabbed Ghost by the collar and pulled him behind the stack of crates, pressing the dog's body against the cold metal wall. The capsule's blue light pulsed harder now, too bright, too exposed, like a traitor's signal cutting through the dark. Voices echoed down the staircase. 2, maybe 3, heavy boots clanging on rusted steps, the sound beating like war drums. "Watch your footing. This structure's 50 years old. Less talk. Find what he took." Caleb scanned the room. No exit. The chamber was a circular tomb of concrete and buried secrets. Ghost breathed slow beside him, disciplined, trained to stay silent even when every instinct screamed attack. The first flashlight hit the room. Caleb held his breath. The beam swept across the walls, the crates, then stopped inches from them. It lingered, then shifted to the capsule. For 3 endless seconds, the light stayed there, analyzing, confirming. Here, the capsule still intact. Footsteps approached. Caleb could hear the man's breathing, steady, controlled, professionals, not cops, operatives. A second voice joined him, older, calm, with that effortless authority of someone used to command. "Get the photos. We need confirmation nothing's been removed." And if he saw it? Silence, then colder. If he did, it's already too late for him. Ghost tensed under Caleb's hand. The veteran gave a slight squeeze. Wait, not yet. The older man stepped closer to the capsule, the blue glow outlining his frame. Tall, broad shoulders, movements sharp and economical, the kind you learn from years in hostile places. He brushed his fingers over the glass. 50 years asleep, and now you wake up. There was something in his tone, not surprise, recognition, like meeting an old enemy face to face. The younger man lowered his camera. "Sir, fresh footprints here. Dog hair too." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. The older man turned slowly, scanning the room. Caleb could feel the weight of his gaze sweeping past the crates, searching, calculating. "Come out," he said, voice low but cutting like a blade. "I know you're here." Caleb didn't move. Ghost trembled, not from fear but restraint, every muscle coiled, waiting for the word, "I won't ask again." And that's when Caleb saw it. On the far wall, half hidden behind a loose metal panel, an old ventilation duct, narrow, almost invisible, but open. He looked at Ghost. The dog had already spotted it. Their eyes met. "I can fit." A third man started down the stairs. Now or never. Caleb moved. Fast. Silent. He yanked the panel free and shoved Ghost into the duct. The dog slipped inside without hesitation, vanishing into the dark. "There!" A flashlight exploded toward him. Caleb dove in after Ghost, metal scraping his hands, shoulders grinding against the narrow sides. A gunshot. The bullet pinged off the duct, inches from his boot. "Don't shoot! We need him alive!" But Caleb was already crawling, chasing Ghost's shadow up the steep passage. Too tight for the men behind to follow. Another shot, then silence. And the older man's voice, calm and cold as the snow outside. "Leave him. I know who he is." Caleb emerged 20 yards away on a snowy hillside choked with frozen brush. Ghost was already there, waiting, eyes locked on him. They ran. The forest swallowed them whole. Branches cracked underfoot. Breath burned in their lungs. But Caleb didn't stop. Couldn't. When he finally slowed, crouched behind a fallen tree, he pulled his phone from his pocket. No signal, of course. He looked at Ghost. The dog had a small cut on his ear, bleeding a little but alive. Whole. Caleb pressed his forehead to the dog's for a moment. Silent, raw gratitude. Then he heard it. Engines. Helicopter. Distant, but closing fast. He looked toward his house, 3 kilometers south, then toward the road leading into town, and there, parked at his front gate, a black pickup. They knew where he lived. Ghost growled low, eyes locked on the direction of the house. Caleb clenched his fists. Ghost's old collar lay on the ground near the cut fence. "They took my dog," he muttered. voice trembling, not from fear, but from rage held tight. He looked at Ghost beside him, alive, loyal, unbreakable. But they don't know what he's carrying. In his coat pocket, folded and dirt-stained, lay the flight log, the proof. The truth someone had killed to bury. And now, they were coming to take it back. Caleb waited until dusk to move. The forest held its breath at that hour, neither day nor night, just a grey silence where predators prepared and prey disappeared. Ghost stayed glued to his side, motionless, an extension of Caleb himself. They didn't need words. After 3 years together, every movement of the dog was a sentence Caleb could read without thinking. Danger left. Clear path right. Wait. Now. They circled behind the property, using the fir trees for cover. The black pickup was still there, but now a dark sedan sat beside it, tinted windows. No plates Caleb recognized. Not federal. Feds didn't hide their tags. He looked toward the house. The front door hung slightly open. A single light glowed inside. Someone was still there. Ghost growled, low, steady, don't go in. But Caleb needed to know. He left Ghost in the brush with a silent hand signal, stay, and crept along the side of the house, using the tool shed for cover. The porch boards creaked under his boot. He froze. Nothing stirred inside. Then a voice, come in, Caleb, I know you're out there. Not an order, an invitation, calm, almost polite. Caleb eased the door open. The living room looked exactly as he'd left it, except for the man sitting in the chair by the cold fireplace. Early 50s, grey suit beneath a dark wool coat, close-cropped silver hair, eyes that had seen too much and stopped feeling a long time ago. He wasn't visibly armed. My name's Dr. Everett Kane, the man said, crossing one leg over the other like he owned the place. Director of Operations, Helios Research. I believe you've already met some of my employees. Caleb stood in the doorway, hands loose at his sides but ready. Employees who open fire on civilians? Kane smiled, humorless, mechanical. They got carried away. I apologize. It wasn't supposed to go that far. How far was it supposed to go? Kane leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, to a civilized conversation like the one we're having now. Caleb didn't move. You broke into my house. And you broke into a federally sealed facility. Kane lifted his hands as if weighing invisible scales. Let's call it even. Silence. Outside, Ghost gave a short bark. Kane glanced toward the window, then back at Caleb. Your dog's well trained. He knows when not to trust someone. Kane chuckled, a dry, clipped sound. Smart. He rose slowly, measured, non-threatening, walked to the window, gazing into the growing dark. You served in the Air Force, 52nd Special Operations Squadron, Afghanistan, 2 commendations. Then, the accident. Caleb's chest tightened. That's not your business. It wouldn't be, Kane said evenly, if you hadn't found something that belongs to me, belongs to you, that thing's been buried for 50 years. Kane turned, and for the first time, something real flickered behind his eyes. Fatigue, or maybe guilt. Exactly, and it should have stayed that way. He returned to the chair, drew an envelope from his coat, and set it on the coffee table. $50,000, clean transfer, anonymous, for the flight log in your pocket and your silence. Caleb stared at the envelope, then at him. And if I say no, then I'll try again. 100, 200, until you say yes. And if I never do, Kane drew a slow breath. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight. What fell from the sky isn't new, Caleb. It's what we tried to bury in '73, a communications experiment that became something else, something that feeds on energy and grows on its own. Last week's explosion reactivated the core, and now it's awake. Caleb took a step closer. Awake how? Alive. Not biological, but aware. If it keeps expanding, it'll bring down the entire Stillwater structure. The whole town goes with it. 1,200 people. Women, children. Kane's gaze hardened. I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to prevent a disaster. By shooting at me, by protecting a secret that can't get out. If the public learns what we did here, it won't matter how many we save. We'll be erased, and the problem will remain unsolved. Caleb felt the flight log pressing against his ribs, the handwriting in his mind. It's alive. You just want to bury it again, deeper. I want to fix what we broke, Kane said, and I need you to let me do that. Outside, the wind rose. The house creaked. Ghost barked, once, twice, 3 times. Warning, Kane heard it too. His eyes narrowed. My men aren't due yet. Caleb turned toward the window. Headlights crawled up the road. Trucks, several of them. 6, maybe 7, not Kane's. His face drained of color. Those aren't mine. The first bullet shattered the window and tore into the wall behind them. Caleb hit the floor. Kane dropped with him, drawing a pistol from his coat. Reflex, not plan. Who are they? Caleb shouted. Kane risked a glance through the broken glass, ducked back fast. The ones who don't want anyone fixing this. Another burst of gunfire. Glass exploding, wood splintering. Ghost barked outside, trapped between defending and surviving. Kane met Caleb's eyes, and for once there was something true there. If you want to live, you'll have to trust me. Caleb's jaw clenched. Then we do it the hard way. An explosion ripped through the front of the house. The door blew inward in flames. Masked men stormed in, guns blazing, and Caleb bolted for the only way left, through the back window, straight into the night, where Ghost was already waiting. Caleb dove through the window, blind and desperate. Feeling shards of glass tear through his coat and scrape his skin, he hit the snow on his shoulder, rolled, and came up running. Ghost was already there, always there, a shadow fused to his side. Behind them, the house roared in flames. Men shouted orders, boots hammered across the porch. Gunfire split the night like dry lightning. Caleb didn't look back. He'd learned long ago, in the desert, in the war, in the sleepless nights, that looking back makes you slower, and slow gets you killed. They sprinted across the open yard toward the tool shed, a rusted metal structure Caleb used for storage. Ghost slipped in first, sweeping the darkness with his nose. Clear for now. Caleb yanked the sliding door shut and braced it with a wooden beam. It wouldn't hold long, but he didn't need long. He just needed time. He grabbed the flashlight hanging from a hook on the wall. Its weak beam revealed the interior. Old tools, supply crates, a workbench thick with dust, and in the far corner, beneath a black tarp, the gear. Caleb ripped the tarp away. Underneath, untouched, were the relics of his former life. A military field radio, a flare gun, portable security cams he'd picked up at an army auction. Never used them, never wanted to. But he kept them anyway because soldiers don't forget, they just postpone. Ghost stood by the door, ears raised, focused on the sounds outside. Men moving, slow, tactical, not amateurs. Caleb powered on the radio, static, adjusted the frequency, more static. Then a voice, faint but sharp. East sector clear, target not located. He recognized the cadence. Military comms, short, clipped, efficient. These men had training, which meant he needed to use his too. Caleb killed the flashlight. Total darkness. He waited 3 seconds, 10, for his eyes to adjust. The shed had 2 exits, the front door he'd just barred, and a narrow side window that opened toward the trees. He glanced at Ghost. The dog already knew. His eyes glowed in the dark like cold embers. Outside, boots crunching in snow, stopping right at the door. Locked. Breach it. Caleb didn't wait. He grabbed one of the night vision cameras, switched it on, and set it on the bench facing the door. Then he pulled the flare gun, cracked it open, and lobbed a live round through the side window, far toward the opposite tree line. 3 seconds. The flare erupted in a blinding red bloom. "Movement! South perimeter!" Boots scrambled. Shouts. Confusion. Caleb smiled. Muscle memory. Still worked. He shoved Ghost through the side window, then followed, slipping into the night as the men charged in the wrong direction. The forest swallowed them whole. Caleb moved fast but steady, navigating terrain he knew like his own skin. Ghost led, low to the ground, paws silent on the packed snow. They reached the old lumber shed, a sagging wooden shack a half-mile from the house, hidden among the pines. Caleb used it for firewood in the winter. Tonight, it was cover. Inside, he lit a thick candle and set it on the floor. The flickering light danced across rotted beams. Ghost lay by the door, still alert, eyes fixed on the dark outside. Caleb pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course, they'd jammed the area. But he had another option. In the inside pocket of his coat, next to the flight log, was a business card a journalist had given him months ago. Maya Torres. She'd come to Stillwater to write about isolated veterans. Tried to interview him. He'd said no, but she'd left the card anyway. "If you ever need anything." Anything. He looked at the number, then at the field radio he'd carried from the shed. And he remembered. The old network. The pre-digital emergency frequency the military once used. Still alive. Barely. He tuned the dial, hooked a copper wire antenna, and waited. Static. Then, a female voice. Distant but clear. "This is Torres. Who's transmitting?" Caleb exhaled. "Maya. It's Caleb Ward from Stillwater." A pause, then genuine shock. "Caleb, what? I don't have much time. I need you to do something for me. And if you don't hear from me by 6 a.m. He looked at Ghost, at the diary in his pocket. "The world needs to know." He told her everything. Fast, precise. The tunnel, the capsule, Project Stillpoint, Kane, the ambush. Maya didn't interrupt. When he finished, silence hung for 3 beats. Then, "I'll get everything ready. If you don't call, I publish everywhere. Thank you. Caleb, be careful." He cut the transmission, set the radio down. That's when Ghost lifted his head, eyes locked on the window. Outside, the sky was changing. Dark clouds gathered over the mountain, but they weren't clouds. They pulsed, glowing from within, with the same blue light Caleb had seen inside the capsule. An electrical storm was forming. But it wasn't coming from the sky. It was rising out of the ground. Ghost growled, low and constant, hackles raised. Not fear, recognition. Something had truly awakened. Then, breaking the stillness, a siren began to wail in the distance. Slow, rhythmic, like a giant heart beating beneath the earth. Caleb closed his eyes and drew a steady breath. "They're coming," he whispered to Ghost. The dog met his gaze, and Caleb knew this time they weren't just coming to capture him. They were coming to bury him with the truth. Dawn came cold and colorless, as if the sky had given up on morning. Caleb hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every sound in the forest was a possibility. Every silence, a threat. Ghost stayed awake too, sharing the watch without complaint, as he always did. There was something wordless and deep in that bond, an unspoken pact between 2 survivors who understood the language of danger better than the language of peace. When the first light finally crept over the horizon, Caleb was already moving. He had to get out of Stillwater, but not before ensuring the truth would survive, even if he didn't. Maya Torres was the only person outside that circle of silence who could make the story reach beyond the mountains, but he needed to give her everything in person. The flight log, the photos on his phone, the charred metal fragments still in his pocket. Ghost led the way, steady, sure-footed over the frozen snow. They skirted the town through the tree line, avoiding the main roads. Caleb knew every trail, every shortcut. 3 years living in solitude had taught him how to listen to the woods, and now that knowledge was keeping him alive. By the time they reached the old highway leading toward Helena, the horizon had begun to pale. From the ridge, he could see the town below, chimneys smoking, lights flickering on. Ordinary life, people waking up with no idea that something beneath them was breathing, growing, waiting. He pulled out his phone. Signal, weak, but there. He dialed Maya's number. 3 rings, 4. Caleb? Her voice was tense, alert. Are you okay? For now. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but he could feel eyes somewhere in the gray. I need to meet. Today. Now. Where are you? Old highway, north exit from Stillwater. There's an abandoned gas station 5 clicks out. Meet me there in an hour. Silence. Then, I'm leaving now. He ended the call and pocketed the phone. Ghost watched him, waiting for the next signal. Caleb knelt beside the dog, running a hand over his head. A rare gesture, but one that mattered. Almost there, he whispered. Just a little longer. Ghost pressed his muzzle against Caleb's palm. Not comfort, agreement. The gas station smelled of stale fuel and rust. Caleb waited inside the gutted store, crouched behind the broken counter, Ghost stationed by the shattered window. With every passing minute, the weight in his chest grew heavier. He stared at the open flight log on the counter. The final words burned in his mind. It's alive. 50 years ago, someone had tried to warn them and been silenced. Now it was his turn to carry the same burden, the same choice. An engine broke the stillness outside. Caleb rose slowly and peeked through the glass. A gray car rolled to a stop. A woman stepped out, early 30s, dark hair tied back, backpack slung over one shoulder. Maya Torres. She scanned the area carefully, then spotted him in the doorway. "You look worse than last time," she said, no humor in her tone, just concern. "Had a rough night." Caleb handed her a makeshift plastic folder he'd salvaged from what was left of his house. Inside, the flight log, the photos, the metal fragments wrapped in cloth. Maya opened it, flipping through quickly. Her eyes widened. "Jesus, Caleb, this is everything you need to prove it happened. Project Stillpoint, 1973, military experiment gone wrong, and it's awake again." She looked at him. "You're sure about this? If I publish, there's no going back." "I know." Caleb's voice was steady. "If I don't call you by 6 a.m. tomorrow, you go public. Everywhere, no questions." Maya closed the folder carefully, as if holding something volatile. "And if you do call, then we decide together." She studied him for a long moment, then offered her hand. Caleb shook it. "Be careful, Caleb." "Always." Maya turned and left. He waited until her car disappeared down the road before moving again. Ghost growled low, staring toward the trees behind the station. Caleb turned and saw it. On the horizon above Stillwater, the storm had grown. It wasn't a cloud anymore. It was a column of blue light rising from the mountain to the sky, pulsing like a massive heartbeat, in rhythm with whatever was waking beneath the earth. The ground trembled, slight but unmistakable. Ghost barked once, not warning, but recognition. It's starting. Caleb looked up at the light, then at the dog, then at the road leading back to Stillwater. He could run. Take Ghost, grab the old truck hidden behind the shed, drive until the gas ran out, leave the town, the mountain, the secret behind. But 1,200 people lived there, people who didn't know, who didn't have a choice. And Caleb had learned long ago that leaving people behind wasn't survival. It was dying slowly from the inside out. He closed his eyes, took a long breath, and felt the weight of the decision settle deep in his chest. Then he looked at Ghost. "We're going back," he said. The dog didn't hesitate. He turned toward the mountain and started walking. Caleb followed, knowing there was no easy way out this time. Far ahead, the blue light pulsed brighter, and a deep, thunderous sound rolled, not from the sky, but from beneath the ground, as if something enormous had awakened and begun to move. The siren wailed again, louder now, urgent, alive. They're coming. Caleb quickened his pace, not to run, to face it. The cabin was all that remained now. Not the house that had burned, that was ash and memory, but the old wooden structure at the top of the ridge, the same place where it all began, where Ghost had found the melted circle, where the mystery had first awakened. Caleb reached it by dusk, carrying everything he'd managed to salvage: tools, rope, rusted nails, loose boards from the shed. Ghost followed his every move, silent and alert, understanding without command that they were preparing for something final. They didn't talk, never had to. Their language was older than words, built on glances, pauses, and a trust forged from shared fear and the mutual promise never to abandon. Caleb boarded up the windows, leaving only narrow slits for sightlines. He braced the door with crossed beams, scattered nails in the snow around the perimeter, simple traps, but effective. He knew these tricks. He'd learned them in the desert, where the difference between living and dying was often a matter of preparation, not luck. Ghost patrolled the edge of the clearing, marking ground, sniffing every corner. He wasn't afraid. He was working. And that steadiness calmed Caleb in a way no human voice ever could. He strung makeshift sensors from tin cans and fishing line. Anything that moved in the dark would rattle. Signal flares were planted in the trees, ready to ignite. Then he set up escape routes, 3 in all, each leading into a different cut of the forest. The last thing he did was record a message. Caleb sat on the floor, back against the cold wall, and hit the red button on his phone. Ghost lay beside him, warm against his leg, eyes fixed on the camera, as if he understood this moment mattered. "My name is Caleb Ward, Air Force veteran. If you're watching this, it means something went wrong." He took a breath, feeling the weight of the words. Beneath Stillwater Mountain, Montana, there's something the government buried in 1973, an experiment called Project Stillpoint. It's alive, and it's waking up. He looked at Ghost. The dog didn't look away. If what's under the ice fully wakes, Stillwater won't exist anymore. 1,200 people, women, children, old folks, people who never knew they were living over a loaded secret. He paused, the lump in his throat tightening, but he went on. "I don't know if I can stop it, but I'm going to try. Because I learned the hard way that leaving people behind isn't surviving, it's dying slow from the inside." He reached out and rested a hand on Ghost's head. The dog closed his eyes for a heartbeat, recognition, gratitude, loyalty. "If I don't make it back, someone needs to finish what I started. Someone needs to protect them." Caleb stopped recording and sent the video to Maya. Then he tucked the phone away and sat in silence. Just him and Ghost, waiting. Night fell fast. Too dark. Too cold. Caleb switched on a dim lantern and placed it in the center of the cabin. Not to see, but to cast moving shadows, to make it harder for anyone coming in to tell where he really was. Ghost crouched by the door, body low, ears up, working mode, controlled alertness. The same focus Caleb had seen a dozen times before. It steadied him. As long as Ghost was there, sharp and ready, nothing could catch them off guard. The improvised radar rig, built from an old field radio, started to chirp. Soft at first, then louder, targets approaching. Multiple. Caleb peered through a slit in the window. Down the trail, climbing the ridge, dots of light moved through the dark. Flashlights, headlights, at least 8 vehicles, maybe 10. They weren't hiding anymore. They were coming full force. Ghost growled, a low, steady rumble from deep in his chest. Not warning, promise. Caleb grabbed a flare and set it beside the window, then checked his second escape route, the one cutting straight into the thick forest where no vehicle could follow. He looked at Ghost one last time before it began. The dog looked back, and in that look was everything Caleb needed. No matter what comes, we face it together. Engines stopped, doors slammed, voices echoed up the frozen slope. Then a megaphone cut through the wind. "Caleb Ward, you've got nowhere to run. Step out now, and no one gets hurt." Caleb stayed silent, waiting. The voice came again, colder. "You've got 10 seconds." Ghost growled louder. Caleb counted in his head. 10, 9, 8. At 3, the ground trembled, faint but real. The blue light on the horizon flared brighter, closer. At 0, they came, not through the door, through the shadows. Caleb heard the first trap snap, a cry of pain, confusion, then another and another. Ghost barked once, short, sharp, flanking left. Caleb fired the flare. Red light exploded across the woods, blinding anyone looking directly in. Shouts, orders, chaos, and beneath it all, the siren began to wail again, louder, faster, rising from the depths of the mountain. Something was waking, and they were standing right in its path. The night detonated in chaos and light. Caleb moved on instinct, not thought, his body remembering what his mind had tried to bury. 3 years of solitude hadn't erased the soldier in him. They'd only pushed him deep underground, and now, under fire. That part clawed its way back up like something ancient rising from a dark lake. Ghost burst through the side door Caleb had unlatched at the last second, vanishing into the forest like smoke. The dog wasn't running, he was flanking. Caleb knew it as surely as he knew when rain was coming. Through that old wordless language, built over 3 years of shared silence and unspoken vows. Outside, men shouted. Flashlights swept the snow. Someone stepped on a nail trap and went down, cursing. Confusion was Caleb's greatest ally, and he intended to bleed it dry. He slipped out the back window, rolled in the snow, crouched low. Darkness swallowed him whole. He knew every tree, every hollow, every inch of ground. He'd spent countless nights walking these woods, trying to exhaust his body enough to quiet the ghosts in his head. Now those nights were saving him. A man appeared to the left, weapon drawn, moving slow, professional, trained, but he didn't know the terrain. Caleb scooped a handful of snow and tossed it right. The man swung toward the sound. Caleb moved the other way, silent, sliding behind a fallen log. A bark echoed from deep in the trees, short, controlled. 3 coming from the north. Caleb shifted course, looping wide to the left, using the firs for cover. The snow muffled everything. The cold bit at his skin, but he no longer felt it. He was in the zone, the place where thought stopped and only precision remained. Then came the hum, low, mechanical. A drone cut across the treetops, its infrared beam slicing through the night. Caleb dove beneath a thick tangle of brush, pressing himself flat against the frozen ground. The drone swept past, turned, passed again. Then Ghost appeared, out of nowhere, launching upward, jaws snapping around the drone's frame. The machine spun wildly, blades shrieking, but Ghost didn't let go. He slammed it once, twice. On the third hit, it shattered. The dog dropped the wreckage and looked back at Caleb, eyes gleaming in the dark. Not triumph, just focus. Move. Caleb crawled to the ruined drone, flipped it over, and pried open the rear compartment with his knife. Inside, a thermal camera was still live, its feed transmitting somewhere. He turned the display toward himself and froze. The screen didn't just show the forest, it showed the cabin, the trail, and there, in pulsing red, his own thermal silhouette, tagged and time-stamped. 3 weeks ago, 2-1. They'd been watching him for weeks, tracking his routes, his sleep, his weak spots. Rage rose sharp in his throat, but he forced it down. Rage made you sloppy, sloppy got you killed. He smashed the rest of the drone, then moved again, Ghost beside him. 2 shadows slipping through the trees in perfect sync. The ground shook. Not a tremor this time, a deep, rolling convulsion that moved through the earth like a living pulse. Trees shivered. Snow dropped in slow, silent cascades. And the sound, that same subsonic hum from the cabin, grew until it wasn't sound at all but pressure, vibrating in teeth and bone. Ghost stopped, looked toward the mountain, then took 2 steps back. Caleb followed his gaze. Up near the old mining ridge, the snow was melting, not gradually but all at once. Steam rose in thick columns, glowing faintly blue from beneath. Then the earth split open. A sound like shattering glass magnified 1,000 times ripped through the valley. A fracture tore down the slope, cracking frozen soil like a wound bursting open, and from inside, blue light surged upward. Not fire, but something fluid and alive, spilling out, spiraling toward the sky in luminous threads like lightning turned inside out. The gunfire stopped. The shouting stopped. Every man in the forest looked up, frozen in awe or terror, staring at the impossible column of light connecting ground to sky. Caleb could feel the heat from it, even from 50 meters away. Not heat like flame, but energy. Living, hungry energy. Something was waking, feeding, and growing. Ghost growled, a deep, guttural sound, every muscle coiled. He didn't want to stay, but he wouldn't leave without Caleb. Helicopters appeared on the horizon, spotlights piercing the dark. Then another, then more. Not military, private, corporate. They were coming straight for the breach. Caleb understood. They weren't here for him. They were here for it. And if it was what the flight logs described, self-sustaining, intelligent, evolving, then everyone here was already standing on the edge of extinction. He looked at Ghost. The dog met his eyes, and in that silent exchange was the question neither dared speak. Is it worth it? But Caleb already knew. He'd learned it years ago in the desert, the night the chopper went down, and he'd chosen to go back for his team. They all died anyway, but he'd gone back because that's what separated surviving from merely not dying. The choice, not the outcome. He looked toward the fissure, toward the light, toward the men and machines racing to contain what couldn't be contained. The only way out, he muttered to Ghost, is through the fire. The dog didn't hesitate. He turned and ran toward the blue glow. And Caleb, for the second time in his life, ran straight into danger instead of away from it. Because sometimes survival isn't about staying alive. It's about protecting what matters, even if it costs you everything. The fissure wasn't just light, it was sound, rhythm, the heartbeat of something that should never have awakened. Caleb ran toward it while every instinct screamed to run the other way. But instinct belonged to the body, and he'd learned long ago not to trust the part of himself that stayed alive by leaving others behind. Ghost ran beside him, paws splashing through the melting snow, body low and focused. The dog didn't look at the blue light. He looked at Caleb, always at Caleb, as if to say, I go where you go, even if it's straight into hell. And maybe that was exactly where they were headed. The helicopters were descending slowly, their rotors whipping snow and vapor into chaotic spirals. Caleb saw men rappelling down on cables, dressed in hazmat suits, carrying metal containment cases. Not soldiers, recovery teams, scientists, people who saw what was happening not as danger but as opportunity. And there, in the center of it all, directing them with surgical precision, was Cain. Even from a distance, Caleb recognized the posture. The man wasn't afraid. He thought he was in control. Caleb stopped at the edge of the fissure. Heat rippled upward, bending the air. The crack in the ground was 4 meters wide, plunging at a steep angle, its walls of molten rock glowing like embers. And at the bottom, beating like an exposed heart, was the source of the light, the artifact. Larger now, pulsing with a rhythm Caleb could feel in his bones. Ghost growled. Not at the fissure, but at the men approaching from the right. Caleb turned. 3 operatives, rifles raised, advancing in formation. He lifted his hands slowly, not in surrender, but to buy seconds, just a few seconds, "Don't move!" one shouted. But Caleb was already moving, not to fight, but for the phone in his pocket. He opened the camera, aimed it at the fissure, at the helicopters, at Kane, and went live. "My name is Caleb Ward," he said, voice steady amid the chaos. "I'm in Stillwater, Montana, and what you're seeing is Project Stillpoint, an abandoned 1973 military experiment the government buried. Literally." The men hesitated. One barked into a radio. Caleb kept talking. "This thing under the mountain is alive, and these people," he pointed toward the helicopters, "they're not here to protect anyone. They're here to take it and hide it again." 50 viewers. 100, 200. Maya was out there, pushing the stream everywhere she could. Kane turned toward him. Even across the distance, Caleb saw the shift in his expression, not anger, calculation, reassessment. Then the earth convulsed, harder this time. The fissure widened, rocks tumbled. One of the helicopters lurched violently, rotors fighting an unseen pull from below. The artifact pulsed once, like a silent explosion. The wave of energy it released knocked 3 men flat. Caleb felt it in his chest, a blow without contact. Ghost staggered back, but stayed standing. Kane's voice cut through the radio static. "Abort! Everyone to the helicopters, now!" Too late. The fissure collapsed inward, not a cave-in, an implosion. The ground folded in concentric circles, sucking snow, debris, equipment. One of the operators slipped, screaming, vanishing into the blue light before anyone could reach him. Caleb dragged Ghost backward, retreating fast. The edge was collapsing toward them like a living tide. They vaulted a fallen tree, hit the snow, kept running. Behind them, a helicopter tried to climb. The rotors spun, but it didn't rise. It was being pulled down. The pilot killed the engine and jumped, tumbling into the snow and running without a glance back. The aircraft vanished in 3 seconds, swallowed whole by light. No sound, no wreckage, and then silence. The wind died. The hum stopped. The blue light flickered one last time, weak, fading, and went dark. Caleb stopped, gasping. Ghost stood beside him, sides heaving. Together they turned back. The fissure remained, but the light was gone. The artifact's pulse had stopped. The heat had vanished, replaced by the cutting cold of a Montana night. Silence. Absolute. Kane stood at the edge of the crater, staring down. His men regrouped around him, dazed, uncertain. No one knew what had just happened, but Caleb did. The artifact had shut itself down, on its own, as if it had recognized the threat was over, or worse, as if it had decided to wait. Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights snaked up the mountain road. Not Helios, Federal. The live broadcast had worked. The world was watching now, and there would be no more hiding this. Kane looked at Caleb. For the first time, there was no mask, just exhaustion, maybe even relief. He didn't run, he just stood there, waiting. Caleb ended the stream. 1,700 viewers, not the whole world, but enough. Ghost pressed his nose against Caleb's hand. Caleb looked down at him, the dog who had stayed through every second of this nightmare. "It's over," he whispered, running a hand over Ghost's head. Ghost looked up, and in his eyes was something Caleb hadn't seen in 3 long years. Peace, not the peace of forgetting. The peace of facing the fire and surviving it. Police vehicles skidded to a stop. Agents poured out, questions shouted. Kane was cuffed without protest. Caleb was surrounded but not detained. Someone recognized him from the broadcast. Someone understood. As order began to swallow the chaos, Caleb stepped away, quietly, Ghost pacing beside him, and disappeared into the tree line. No one stopped them, because some battles don't end with medals or headlines. They end with the simple right to go home and breathe again. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Ward felt like he had earned that right. 6 weeks later, Stillwater breathed differently, not peace, not exactly. It was something closer to a truce. between the town and the mountain, between past and present, between what had been buried and what had finally come to light. The fissure had been sealed again, this time by federal crews, civilian scientists, and live cameras. No more secrets, no more silence bought and sold. The world had seen, and once the world sees, you can't pretend it didn't happen. Kane was somewhere between lawyers and closed-door hearings. Helios research had collapsed in 3 days. Some executives vanished, others talked too much. The truth, as always, was bigger and dirtier than any official version dared to admit. But Caleb wasn't paying attention to any of that anymore. He'd come back to what was left of his property. The burned house was only foundation and ash now, covered by a thin layer of snow that softened the edges of destruction. It didn't hurt to look at it, not anymore. Because a house was wood and nails, a home was something else entirely. Home was the dog lying beside him on the makeshift porch he'd rebuilt from scrap. It was the sound of wind through the pines. It was silence that didn't need to be filled with apologies or explanations. Ghost lifted his head when a car climbed the road. He didn't growl, just watched, patient, waiting to see if it was threat or not. Caleb knew that look. The look of someone who'd seen too much but hadn't given up on trust. Maya stepped out of the car, a cardboard box in her arms, a tired smile on her face. She'd spent the past weeks buried in interviews, articles, and pressure from every direction, but she was still standing. Some people were built that way. They cracked, but they didn't fall. "Brought donations," she said, setting the box down. "Food, blankets, toys. People want to help." Caleb opened the box. Inside were stacks of dog supplies, and at the bottom, a handwritten letter from someone in another state, a stranger. "Thank you for not giving up." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "There are more folks wanting to send dogs," Maya added, leaning against the fence Caleb had started rebuilding. "Rescue dogs with nowhere to go. Veterans who need somewhere quiet to breathe. I thought maybe—" "Yes," Caleb said, cutting her off softly. No hesitation. "Bring them." Maya smiled, not surprised, just knowing. She'd expected that answer before she asked. Ghost rose and padded to the edge of the porch, eyes fixed on the mountain trail. Caleb followed his gaze. Up there, where it had all begun, snow covered the scars. The wound in the earth was still visible, but nature was slowly, patiently doing what it always did, healing. Some wounds take time, others never close completely, but you learn to live with them, to carry them without letting them define you. That night, Caleb hiked to the top of the ridge. Ghost walked beside him, their steps perfectly in sync, no commands needed. They didn't talk, they never did. But there was a steady conversation between them, built of pauses and glances, and a loyalty that didn't need proof, because it had already been tested in fire and found true. At the spot where the melted circle had first appeared, Caleb stopped. Snow covered everything now. Nothing marked that something impossible had once happened here. But he knew. Ghost knew. And maybe that was enough. He looked up at the sky. The stars were cold and clear and distant, and on the far horizon a faint blue flicker appeared, weak, brief, almost imperceptible, not threatening, just there. A reminder that some things don't have explanations, and maybe don't need them. Ghost sat beside him, body warm against Caleb's leg. The veteran ran his hands slowly over the dog's rough fur. He said nothing. He didn't have to, because home wasn't a place. It never had been. It was what you chose to protect, the quiet promise you made each day not to give up, even when everything in you screamed to run. It was the dog at your side who trusted you with a faith so pure it forced you to be better than you thought you could be. Caleb took a deep breath. The cold air filled his lungs, clearing something old and heavy that had lived there far too long. "We made it," he murmured, mostly to himself. Ghost looked at him. And in that gaze was everything: recognition, gratitude, unwavering loyalty, and something else. Something Caleb hadn't seen in 3 years. Hope. Not the hope that everything would be okay, but the kind that makes you believe it's worth trying anyway. That waking up tomorrow and starting again isn't surrender, it's courage. Ghost pressed his nose against Caleb's hand. Caleb smiled. Small, real, honest. They stayed there for a while, 2 survivors on a mountain, staring at the same sky where it had all begun. Then, together, they turned back toward home. Because in the end, it didn't matter what was buried beneath the earth or hidden among the stars. What mattered was what you chose to protect, what you chose to carry, and who you chose to walk beside when the night grew too cold and the world too heavy. For Caleb Ward, that was Ghost. It was the refuge he'd build for others like them. It was the choice to keep going, even when giving up would have been easier. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. If you made it to the end of this story, comment courage down below and click the yellow bell to subscribe to the channel and support us. Keep the adventure going by clicking the next suggested video on your screen.